our fight, on our desk, on our rights. Hey, hey. Justice, peace. Beware the trouble. Justice, peace. To uncover, yeah. The heart of a man, the way of this land. Injustice for all was never the plan. Nah. Never the plan. It's never the plan. Justice beats for the 2.5 part. Justice beats. Let's talk smart. Justice beats for the 2.5 part. Justice beats. Let's talk smart.
The Justice Beat is dedicated to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. The Justice Beat is where we discuss all things justice.
Thank you for tuning in to the 10th episode of the Justice Beat Talk Show's 4th season. Today's topic is cannabis advocacy. Today's guest is Abrahama Keys. Abrahama Keys is a cannabis advocate from St. Louis, Missouri. She is the executive director of Greater St. Louis NORML. She is the Missouri Events and Marketing Coordinator for Presto Doctor, a national medical marijuana certification provider, and the owner of We CANN, a business organization whose purpose is to build meaningful connections and provide education within the cannabis community. Abrahama hosts patient events throughout the greater St. Louis area and across the state of Missouri to facilitate networking, education, and patient engagement. She has a passion for cannabis and works daily to reduce the stigma surrounding this plant.
Good morning, and welcome to the Justice Beat Talk Show for another installment. This is our pre-Thanksgiving show. Just want to make a quick note that next Saturday we will not be live. We'll all be taking a very much needed break. Today we have with us Abrahama Keys. She is with Greater St. Louis NORML, and NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Legislation. Welcome, Abrahama.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we couldn't wait. We're looking forward to this discussion. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion around your activities with Greater St. Louis NORML.
So I am the executive director of Greater St. Louis NORML. We're one of about 6 NORML chapters here in Missouri. St. Louis does have the largest chapter. So basically we really work with the community, kind of educating the community around like marijuana legislation and laws, and working with different organizations and groups as they're now pressing for recreational legalization for adult use in 2022. So we've done a lot of work kind of talking with different groups about what that legislation will look like, as well as just working with some of the active things going on right now, just in regulations and things like that, and overall community outreach to keep people kind of connected with marijuana usage and where people are legally for it, for the most part.
Now you said there are 6 chapters is it in the state of Missouri?
Yeah, in the state of Missouri. So it's a national organization, and then there's chapters in St. Louis,
Mhm.
Kansas City, Springfield, Cape Girardeau. So a few different locations, which is great because a lot of marijuana legislation and laws are different depending on what areas you're in. So we kind of work to kind of watchdog or keep an eye on what legislation is like in our areas.
Okay. What is the status of the current legislation around marijuana in St. Louis?
So, medical marijuana is legal in all of Missouri. So you could go out and obtain a medical card, and then you're allowed to possess up to 4 ounces a month from different dispensaries, wherever you may choose to go and buy. And then we are working on adult use, so that would basically make any adult use recreationally legal as well.
Okay, so
So,
hold up. What's the difference between what is defined adult use?
so adult use, you don't need a medical card. So
Uh-huh.
you'd be able to just go into a dispensary and purchase based on just like you do kind of a wine store or any other business. And that would open up the dispensaries to all anyone above 21.
Mhm.
Whereas right now you need to have a medical reason, and there are a lot of reasons that people use medical marijuana. So everything from cancer to people who just have severe pain. A lot of people, back pain is like one of the main prescriptive reasons for it, because you just want to use it for something other than your kind of traditional medical approach.
Okay. All right. Go. I wanted to stop because I'm sure somebody might have said, okay, well, wait a minute, medical and then adult. Adult is more recreational.
Yeah, so that means even if you didn't have the card, you could you need nothing but a driver's license to go in and purchase.
And so what I want to break this down before we give them a whole lot of information. So with the medical card, what do you need to obtain a medical card? Do you have to go to a physician? How do they verify that you actually have a need to use this for medicinal purposes?
So you do have to actually consult with a physician. You can do it either in person or online. You can do it with your own personal doctor if they give you a recommendation for it, or there are physicians that are just specifically for that. It can be done completely virtually. So a lot of people right now, and especially during the pandemic, we actually became legal during the pandemic. So that was a really big thing for people to use telehealth, where you go in, you consult with a physician, you let them know, why it is that you're using, medical cannabis in your daily lifestyle. And then they say, okay, based on that, because really most people, who are using it have some reason that's a lot, kind of physically related. A lot of times people are using it for anxiety, they're using it for sleep, they're using it for chronic pain. So you explain those kind of uses to the physician, and then they approve you and send a recommendation over to the state. And then the state of Missouri registers you as a medical cannabis patient, and you wouldn't be subject to, prosecution and such for having your medicine.
Okay, and does the card expire? Do you have to renew it?
Yes, so you renew once a year, and then all of your information. And it also does allow you the ability to cultivate as well. So if you're interested in growing cannabis, you can cultivate in your home up to 18 plants. So yeah, there's a lot of good options. You can also be a caregiver and provide care for someone else. So if you had a family member and they were interested in having their medicine, but getting it from a reliable source, and you're the type of person who's good at gardening, then you could provide medicine for them and grow for them as well.
Don't want me to do it because I ain't got no green thumb. But
Yes, no.
you talking about growing stuff? Oh God, I'll be messing. Oh my goodness.
It takes a lot of work too. It takes a lot of daily watering. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot, but it's well worth it.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of people then can kind of regulate the uses. People have different, each strain has a different kind of medicinal cause that it may be better for. Some are better
Mm.
for your eyes, some are better for sleep, some are better for pain. So that really allows people to kind of like focus on what it is that they're actually using
Mhm.
the marijuana for. So
You mentioned 4 ounces a month can be purchased, right? What is that equivalent to? Like, because
um,
it
that
seems little to me.
it seems little, but it's a good amount.
Mhm.
And you can have that up, say that if you say, hey, I'm really just using too much and it's not, you know, working. Sometimes people change it into topicals, like different creams, or they may
Mhm.
change it into edibles, and that may mean that you need a little more because you're not directly inhaling it and doing the smoking process. So
Mhm.
there are options to obtain more, but 4 ounces is a pretty good amount for your average smoker.
Mhm. What about CBD oil?
Now, CBD, you don't need a card for.
Okay.
CBD you can purchase from any store. There are a lot of kind of chains around that supply it that are good. CBD Kratom is a really big one that you probably have seen like a few different stores, or a lot of people have seen. They have like 12 stores in the area. So you can walk into a store just off the street and purchase CBD.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So we broke that down for folks. Now, with you were going to give us a lay of the landscape around legislation in St. Louis around marijuana usage. So go for it.
Yeah. So in St. Louis, it's been decriminalized. So that means even if you don't find someone who has a card, if you don't have a card and you're caught with cannabis, up to 100 grams, which is a pretty large amount. That's a few
Mhm.
ounces, which is a month supply basically. So if
Mhm.
you had your whole entire month supply and then some, um, then you wouldn't be actually prosecuted.
Mhm.
So they're not prosecuting for that. They're giving fines,
Mhm.
if anything. And so that, you know, kind of, it really changes the landscape because there are so many people that go to jail or, you know, end up caught up in the system because of these small minor offenses that
Mhm.
snowball into other things. And so that was really important. NORML was actually a part of that process, initially proposing a bill that reduced it down to it started off with 38 grams. That was, you would, even if you didn't have a card, if someone, the police stopped you and you had that, it would still be a fine or a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
And then when Kim Gardner came in, she raised that to 100 grams, and so that kind of expanded it even more
Mhm.
for people. So it really, the good thing is if you're in St. Louis, again, it's pretty, and the same thing with Kansas City as well. They've kind of done some similar things. So
In terms of
um,
within the decriminalization
yeah,
space.
in
Uh-huh.
terms of decriminalization.
Mhm.
And then if you are a medical patient and you know you provide your card when you're pulled over with your, as long as you're not actively, of course, you can still obtain a DUI or a DWI just the way
Mhm.
you, same way you would with alcohol. So you don't want to be just driving around like with your blunt, you know, like
Right, right,
actively smoking, and
mm,
then when the police pull up, like, no, I'm a patient,
right.
because you can't actually do that. But the
Yeah.
possession of marijuana is fully decriminalized. And there are very few, usually DUIs or DWIs kind of attached with cannabis because people usually honestly are driving slower, if anything, with it. So it's usually the same effect as alcohol. We have not had a large influx of people being like, hey, we're being prosecuted, or we
Mhm.
haven't had any like police departments reach out. So you can be prosecuted though if you are caught like that. And so, but other than that, it's really moving towards really the attitude of adult use in general and completely being something that you're not seeing people prosecuted for.
Mhm.
Some of the areas that we are pushing for are for medical use for people who are on parole or probation.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people who are medical cannabis patients who may be on parole or probation,
Mhm.
and it may have nothing whatsoever to do with drugs while they're on, under this kind of supervision, and they do have a legitimate cause, but depending on who your parole officer is, you may be violated. And so we're really working to kind of build more provisions in for people, even with recreational, so
Yeah.
that if you are a patient and you are, under supervision from, the Department of Justice, then you wouldn't have kind of those same issues. Because really, when you think about it, if someone is using oxycodone while they're on parole or probation, they aren't violated for that. And that's a far stronger medicine with a far stronger, implications than cannabis. So we're really just working to kind of reduce the stigma and a lot of those kind of back end prosecutions and
But
kind of
technical
use
violations.
cannabis. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
a lot of the history of cannabis in general is really rooted in especially surrounding prohibition around racism,
Yeah.
purely flat out.
Mhm.
And so a lot of their uses to prosecute started even with like Mexican Americans,
Mhm.
all the way to like Russian Americans during the Cold War. So we've
Mhm.
seen it kind of over and over again being weaponized against a lot of different groups. So that's the importance kind of me for being involved in an organization like NORML, is to be able to kind of um, stop some of that, or make sure that we're monitoring those conversations around legislation and making sure that we're highlighting these things and making sure that we're addressing them so that we don't see that going forward. And so that when we do get to full recreational adult use, and even within like the program that we have now, that
Mhm.
we're addressing the real needs and concerns and issues raised by prohibition.
So are they at the table, probation and parole? Or do you all have any kind of established partnership or collaboration with probation and parole to be at the table when this legislation is being discussed?
So we don't actually have it with probation and parole, but when legislation is built, that was one of the reasons I really wanted to be a part of NORML, was
Mhm.
because there's so much that's written into the legislation when they do, marijuana legislation. And any legislation is so many different little caveats, everything from where stop signs and stoplights are placed to where
Mhm.
trees and doors go, everything is really kind of tied to some type of law somewhere, political kind of action, a lot more than we think of daily. So when we
Mhm.
write these laws, that's a part of what we talk about. We talk about advocating for people who are on probation and parole and
Mhm.
making sure that legally they can't be prosecuted. And so that's what we worked on writing in. And also even parental protections. We've seen people who are going through divorces, and the spouse may be like, this person is using cannabis, and that's the reason why I don't think my children should be with them, or things like that. We've seen a lot of cases that have come, across the table. And so Kansas City NORML was also very active in getting some additional coverage placed in the medical program to help protect those groups. And that was important for us going forward when we're looking at recreational and what's been happening with medical, making sure that that's initially written into the law so that we don't experience things like people still kind of running into this after we've legalized.
Mhm. And it seems to me that when you're looking at the reentry of folks who've been formerly incarcerated, like the free reentry phase, maybe a year to 6 months before the person is going to be released, there should be maybe some kind of way to document or notate in their files. If they see, they're not going to give them, from what I know, they're not giving them cannabis in prisons, okay? But if they have a condition or medical situation that may require medical use of marijuana, maybe that should be documented somewhere, or even at the point where when they see a doctor upon release, and that doctor may prescribe and say, hey, this is something I want to recommend, parole and probation need to be called to the table at that point so that they cannot sabotage something that is really legitimately a need. Because a lot of what probation and parole does, all these technical violations, you know, the woman that was in DC and she was recently featured on Steve Harvey, who was violated because she was in a computer class, which was required of her to develop her, to upskill and retool herself because she had been incarcerated for so long. And she was in the middle of taking an exam and they violated her because she did not answer the phone when the probation officer called to check in on her. But she's in the middle of taking an exam. So you see those technical violations that, so, you know, around the medicinal use of marijuana and someone really may having a legitimate need really needs to be addressed with probation and parole. Because a lot of their technical violations are pretty punitive and antiquated at the same time, you know. And I see that's what it's going to be your biggest issue is in terms of that particular population of people is probation and parole.
Yeah. And one of the things that we are focusing on, even outside of NORML, I work with an organization called We CANN that's all about building genuine community connections within like cannabis and the community itself and outside businesses. And one of the big things that I've been focused on is bringing that education about just the medical cannabis program and what people can and can't do to those populations that don't naturally figure this out because they've always been black market or they've just been, you know, which are regular street cannabis purchases. And so it's really important, even with like my work with NORML as well, and really reaching those populations and educating them, because cannabis use is the same for all populations, for white people, for black people, for among most like of our major groups in America. People are using cannabis at the same rate. The majority of Americans, over 60% now, agree with legalization federally. And so it's really important to me to kind of make sure that I continue to educate our people and people who are really disproportionately affected by cannabis legislation and law and prohibition right now, so that they know, hey, I can go get a card and not have to worry about, you know, being pulled over or being, you know, arrested, fined, anything like that. And just making that information available, because a lot of people just don't know. Like, people are like, oh, well, if I could pay $50 and get my card, I probably would. Then I wouldn't have to worry about, you know, riding around and being nervous or being nervous about other things. And so I think it's just really important to do that. And also, just because if you were a grower, maybe previously black market, or you had been to jail before for distribution or something like that, there's nothing that stops you once you're off of papers from actually being a caregiver or a patient. So we could take that skill that you have right now and turn that into something legal. You could become a caregiver for people. People are really looking, especially within the cannabis community, for people who are experienced growers to provide that caregiver kind of level of medicine. Yeah, and support and really knowing the product. And so if you've done it and maybe been jailed before, you know, this would be an opportunity for you to legally make money, provide a service to your community, you know, and do something that a lot of times people love, because like you said, it does take a lot. And so, you know, a lot goes into it, but people are still sitting in jail for what now people are turning into a full lifestyle and career. So
that was going to be my next point. With the legislation that you all are working on, Is there any kind of retroactive provisions in there for those
Yes.
people who are incarcerated?
So if Missouri passes legalization and has adult use, then it will be an automatic expungement clause. On all of the different, there are a few different petitions that are circulating right now. There are that will either A, turn up on the ballot, or B, will just be a vote within like the House or Senate. And all of those include automatic expungement. And that's a big part of.
So either way it goes, if it's a House vote or on the ballot, both will allow for expungement.
Yes, so both will have expungement. So if you are in jail right now and this bill passes, or the actual IP that's circulating the most heavily right now, which is Legal Missouri 2022 is the group who's putting that out. There's an automatic expungement clause, so you will immediately be able to go out and petition the judge and say, hey, I want to get out of jail. Now what I went to jail for is no longer a crime. And then they would have to release you. So, yeah.
So, okay, so now, is there a distinction though on the retroactive piece? And is there an amount, a threshold? So for example, someone who got stopped with a very, very minimal amount, right? Versus someone who was trafficking and distributing.
Yes. So what they're looking at is what becomes legal now. So even right now, when you become with adult use, that's not adult distribution. So you still wouldn't be able to sell marijuana just to the general public, unless you're a licensed cannabis facility, unless you went through the whole state process, obtain your license, just like a bar or any other business that, handles things like that. So it only would still be coming from the dispensary. And of course, that's kind of where they set the amounts, like 100 grams or 200 grams or, any of those amounts. That's how they're kind of set, is that they're looking at what would be considered regular use compared to what would be considered distribution amounts. Because if you have a pound of marijuana, then chances are you're not using that for yourself. And so they also look at that. So there are thresholds for that, and your expungement would have to fall into those thresholds. So if whatever is legal now, if that's what you went to jail for 10 years ago, then you would be free.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I'm curious about, how do they determine where these dispensaries are located? Like, are you finding in certain neighborhoods there's some backlash or resistance to these dispensaries being placed in their neighborhoods? And what is that process like? Because I'm just sitting up here thinking, would I want one in my neighborhood? Although there are tremendous benefits, medicinal purposes and stuff, right? You always got that fragment of the population that can take something meant for good and turn it into some evil. Okay. And a lot of folks are resistant to that type of entity being located in their communities or close proximities to schools or what have you. What are the parameters for that?
So there are parameters built into this. Most cities actually welcome dispensaries because they generate a large amount of tax revenue for them.
Follow the money. Go ahead.
Yes. So there are very few areas, especially in the St. Louis region, there was very, very little pushback. There were a lot of places that were like, hey, put us in the meeting, we'll take one. Like, it was like one area near Kansas City that was really adamant about it, and they ended up with dispensaries anyway. And so for the most part, also with there being medical, you need a card, and the card costs at least $50. It's a $25 fee to the state. So usually, that kind of weeds out a lot of people who are just in it for kind of that negative use or kind of those negative lifestyles. Those are the people who are still black market, who are still buying from friends or people they know or off the street. Whereas a lot of your people who are using dispensaries are people who are, you know, just your everyday kind of consumer, just like you're going into any other store, like a gas station. And it costs a large amount of money to get a dispensary going.
Let's talk about that. What does that look like, that money?
So really, to get a dispensary upwards going, you need upwards of $250,000. And so, yeah, so the people who are opening these dispensaries are not just like, you can go and say, hey, I want to open a dispensary and sell here. No, you have to have a full workup plan. You have to have security built into it, strong security measures. It costs $10,000 a year just to continue licensing, to make sure that you're within compliance. So yes, it's very,
Abrahama.
Yeah. So it's very, very restrictive.
Who's opening up these dispensaries?
So yeah, there is only, I think there are only three Black license holders in Missouri.
Out of how many?
Two of them are in transportation, which has the least barriers, and one is a national corporation, kind of. They're a multi-state operator. So it is very restrictive to the everyday person as far as opening a dispensary. There are a lot of, and that's another thing. Cannabis legislature should, and usually does, have social equity clauses. And part of those social equity clauses are fully based around ensuring that everybody of every societal group, and even more so those that are diminished or disproportionately affected, are able to enter into the market. Specifically because, I mean, if you've been heavily policed for all this time for something that's now legal, it would, stand to be, common sense that it would be something where we would try to work to fix what's been going on in those communities. And so that is part of the conversation. Every state is different. Every law, kind of every possible option that you have out there writes it in differently. But that's one of the big and important parts, again, about having a lot of people be a part of these conversations, because how much or how little is done to ensure that social equity is put into play is all about how that law is written. If there is something where there are specific amounts of money going to it, if there's something where there are specific programs that help ensure that these businesses are successful because of all the barriers surrounding entry. And really, it's been really interesting because there are, again, it looks different in every state. Kind of what social equity turns into for the industry. And so in Missouri, I've really just been trying to follow what's going on here and really look at the advancements that are being made everywhere. The good thing is there are a lot of advancements being made. Like even in Illinois, we saw all of kind of the noise and media surrounding the lotteries, because they do it by lottery. So if you're a social equity applicant, and that doesn't just necessarily mean that you're African American. That may mean you're a woman who is of Latino descent. That may mean that you're a immigrant of any other country. That may mean you're just a woman in general who's like, I just haven't had the ability. So it's different groups, just outside of those majority groups. And so really kind of writing in something to make sure that there are provisions for these groups was also important for me in being a part of the conversation here in Missouri and watching what other places are doing, because now every new state that comes online has to address social equity because it's been such a big issue in other states.
Sorry, every what that comes online?
every new state that comes online with cannabis legislation now really has to address that issue of social equity in a way that they kind of didn't before, because it's a snowball effect. When you come in and people say, oh, and you see what happens in Illinois, and you see how they're like, okay, well, we don't think that enough went where it was supposed to. When you look at building the law kind of for your state, it's like, okay, we don't want what happened in Illinois to happen. So how do we make sure that we are correctly implementing these programs and we're making pathways for these groups?
Okay. How many cannabis dispensaries are in Missouri?
So there are 194 licenses available, but it takes a lot, again, to get a dispensary going. So I want to say we may be at about 75 to 100 of those 194.
So 194 available slots
Mm-hmm.
and 75 currently occupied.
Yeah, about 75 to 100 currently operational. Yeah.
And
So,
go ahead.
So yeah, because it's very difficult to get it up and going, and especially with the pandemic, just the build outs, the supply chain. Like as I said, it's a closed supply chain. So in order to be able to grow cannabis on a commercial level, you have to have a license. In order to be able to manufacture it into anything like an edible or oil, you have to have a license. A dispensary can only purchase from a licensed cultivator.
So let's talk about that. So how many licensed cultivators are there in the state of Missouri?
There are approximately 60.
60?
Mm-hmm. There are only operational a fraction of those because we were not legal until 1/1/2020. And then it takes approximately 4 months to grow cannabis from seed to all the way full. And then it's a very, very delicate process, especially if you want to grow it at commercial levels. It takes, like I said, 4 months minimum kind of to grow. So once all that is gone, you need to keep having that constant rotation. So some of the pushback, especially that we've seen in some of the kind of complaints about the program, are that we haven't got up and going as quickly as a lot of people would like, especially on the cultivation side, because it's a matter of supply and demand. The less supply that you have, the higher the demand and the price. But if you balance out the supply, then that kind of lowers the price. So a lot of what Missouri has really been waiting to see is more cultivators come online to kind of balance out the price point for it.
And so what is the cost associated with being a cultivator?
So for a cultivator, you would just pay for your regular physician certification. And then when you go to the state, it's an additional $100 to become a cultivator, and you can then grow your own.
So it's more to open up a dispensary.
Yeah. So if you want to
go ahead.
Yeah. If you want to open up, but as a cultivator, you're limited to how many you can grow, which is enough for yourself, but it gets tricky depending on what your yields are to really supply the amounts that they're allowing you to grow, or for that reason kind of restricted so that you have enough for yourself but not to supply the entire community. And so you can take on, like I said, an additional patient, and that ups your yields and how much you're allowed to grow, because then it doubles based on how many people you take on as a caregiver. But if you want to get that actual commercial level growing, you have to go through a full licensing process with the state of Missouri.
Now, the way my brain is working, it seems like you could set up a full one-stop shop. Dispensary, cultivation, and even outsourcing manufacturing, as well as the support, medical support to families or the elderly. And some of that can offset costs associated with the implementation of the cultivation piece. That's a nominal fee, but more so with the dispensary piece, like the outsourcing of assistance to those who need help, the elderly, someone very sick. The revenue generated from that could help you branch off into perhaps the cultivation and then ultimately the dispensary, right?
Yeah.
Instead of everything being so fragmented. I hope I might be giving somebody some ideas, but
You say, yeah, right.
You know, but it just seems very, very work. It seems to be working against people's what I think is natural processes of how you build and expand.
It does. It really does. And that's one of the things that we're trying to address and make some changes to with adult use is there to be more options for people to kind of enter the industry because it is really restrictive. Now, what we have seen a lot of is even more restrictive on a larger level, because in order to win a license, that would be what you call a vertical operation is
what do you
they
mean
call
win?
that.
What do you mean win? You got to win?
Yes. So to get an actual facility license, so they gave out 194 dispensary licenses.
So it's a lottery?
It's an application process.
Okay.
So you have to put forth the very best application that you can. That would be, you have to have a total plan from start to finish to what you're going to be looking like 10 years from now. And so people build these big applications. A lot of times you'll get like people who are specialists within the industry to kind of step in and advise on these applications. Because they literally can cost, tens of thousands of dollars in consulting fees even to build out an application. There's a group like out of Vegas that was offering application assistance for like $30K. That's what their starting rate. So yeah, it's a whole industry surrounding the application, because there are 194 dispensary licenses that were issued. There were probably 1,000 applicants.
I got the plan. You got education, training, and technical assistance around this. You bring in revenue from that. You build off from there, set up a agency where you send people out to help the elder. That's more generated revenue. Cultivation, and then open up your dispensary. You build it. I mean, there are at least 4 major parts to this. But when you say they're restrictive, are they not allowing people to do more than one facet of this industry?
You can, but it just becomes so expensive. Like I said, it's $10,000 for a dispensary, just the actual fee for the license each year.
But I'm asking about the education training piece to set up like an education awareness and training arm, right? Start there. Let's talk about how you do this, right? Yeah. You generate revenue and fees from there. That can help you pay for the next implementation phase, which could be the cultivation piece. And you're generating revenue from there because people will want your product. And then you're generating major revenue to be able to go and probably pay cash money for the dispensary.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people doing that now, definitely on a smaller level, just like you're talking about. So as I said, if you're a caregiver, you can grow for up to 3 additional people in yourself. So that means you have 18 times 4 plants that you could have, which is 50.
That's 18 times 4 plants. That's 72.
Yeah, so you could have that many plants total. And so people have started even building like co-ops where there's a person who's a caregiver and they have their 72 plants in that part of the building, and then they have another portion of the building where they have another caregiver. And so if you are the person who controls that space, then you can and you don't have to pay the $10,000 sign-up fee for a dispensary. You can provide education to people through
Good.
there. So there are a lot of different facets. The
Mhm.
organization that I completely started a business called We CANN.
Okay.
I have the t-shirt on today.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I have an event actually at 12 today. So
Okay.
I do all cannabis education and engagement outside of NORML. So
Okay.
NORML is basically that legislation kind of focus. I do
Okay.
more patient focus, direct patient events where, like today, there'll be a bunch of dispensaries on site talking about
Mhm.
what they offer,
Mhm.
a bunch of local growth stores on site, and then
Okay.
it's free for the general public to just come in and learn about these businesses. Of course, they pay a vendor fee to set up.
Is this
And kind of,
annually done or once a
yeah,
month?
so I do it annually. I did it last year as well, and then
Okay.
this year. And so it's a really good way to kind of be engaged in the community. There are so many ancillary businesses are a really great way for people to kind of break in. A
Mhm.
lot of the businesses that'll be on site like today are minority owned by women, owned by, people of color that are just parts of the community. It's the guy who has a whole grow setup school where he comes out, he teaches you at home how to set up your whole closet or space or wherever you'd like to grow, and advises you what lights to buy and what all you need.
Okay.
And that's like what he does. There's another girl on site who talks to people before if they just want to know. A lot of times people want to know, is cannabis really for me? Like, who's the person I can talk to and figure out if my back pain really can be helped before I actually see a doctor? Because doctors are intimidating. You don't necessarily want to call them beforehand. So there's a whole market of people who are also entering the industry in a multiple different ways, just kind of based on the fact that there are some barriers, but they've been really successful outside of that. We CANN has been great. I also work with educating the dispensaries, and helping them kind of educate people who work with them, educate people in the community. A lot of times, once you get up and operational, it's not a lot of space left for that, actually. So, if you're thinking about it, if every day you have customers coming through the door, you have to keep the product going, it's a limited staff to then say, oh, I want to hold a whole event where I build a whole, patient
Right.
engagement type deal. And so that's where we step in. So it's a lot of different ways to kind of enter in the industry, even though you may not necessarily be opening a dispensary. And that's why I think it's just important, cannabis in general. And that's what drew me to it, is even in other communities. I did a lot of traveling before actually, cannabis became legal here. And the other places that I went, I saw people doing puff and paint. I saw people doing cannabis yoga. I saw people that did so much, so many
Right.
different things that
I'm
really
gonna tell you what killed me was the cannabis brownies. Okay.
that is the thing. That is old as time. When I go to Jamaica, they are cannabis brownie out. Like, I'm like, oh wow. So I don't even think people eat brownies in Jamaica, but there are weed brownies
Really?
everywhere. Yeah. So a lot of it was just really seeing the impact in communities and spaces, other places, that
Right.
then made me say, there's so much opportunity in, for people here in St. Louis, here in Missouri, once this kind of enters the picture.
Right.
So,
Okay. All right. Well, we're a couple of minutes past our 10:45 break for Q&A, but it's all good because it's been a free-flowing, straight discussion. Excellent. I want to check in with my team to see if we have any questions coming in. Nick, Vito.
Yes.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good. This is such a lovely conversation. I'm totally lost in it.
Right. I know, right?
It doesn't look like we've got much on Facebook or Twitter. But what amazing conversation. Thank you, Abrahama, for that. I think I'm particularly interested in how this is one of the few issues where both, very conservative people and very liberal people tend to agree that, marijuana prohibition is just sort of right. So I'm very curious about, your thoughts on that, but I can kick it over to Nick so that they can give us an update on the Zoom.
Okay. Hey, Nick. You with us, Nick?
I know they've been having a little trouble with Zoom lately.
Okay.
So they might need a second.
I'm going to kick it over to Tandle, who is in South Africa. Tandle?
Mr. Lane, hey, Abrahama. I'd just like to say I think you're doing great work bringing inclusivity into the space of decriminalizing marijuana as a Black woman in America. So kudos to you. And this is my question to you, right? So you mentioned something about how in litigation parties can argue in divorce and custody that the use of marijuana affects the child. So I want to know whether a party or an amicus curiae can argue in court that the use of cannabis is not a justifiable limitation, especially in divorce, because it bars one to access the type of health services they prefer. And my question is based on a landmark case in South Africa that happened in 2008, where it was found that there's no persuasive medical evidence that marijuana in small amounts is harmful to users, particularly compared to the harm resulting from the use of alcohol. Nor was the proof that marijuana use caused violence or aggressive behavior. So I just want to know from you, can an amicus curiae or any party in court argue for medical marijuana as a form of health access that one actually has a right to?
Tandle is infamous for 3-4 part questions. I hope you got all of that, okay?
I was like, okay.
Mr. Lane, I'm sorry.
No, totally. That's a really good question. And the good thing is that it hasn't been holding up. So a lot of these cases, and that's the good thing about NORML, what we work to do is kind of connect people with, we have some attorneys here in state that have kind of zoned in on the fact that this is what they're doing. And they've been really active in being advocates for those individuals and using a lot of the information that you just kind of presented, that there is no link between violent behavior and marijuana use, and that a lot of these people have their card, and that's the importance of being able to have the card, and that they're using it like medications. And like I said, we wouldn't be having this conversation about oxycodone or some seizure medicines or some other medicines that have really strong side effects that may stop people from being able to parent effectively even, so we've really kind of used that information and really having legal representation that is on board and have the appropriate knowledge. Our NORML chapter in Missouri is ran by a lawyer named Dan Vietz, who has been in the cannabis law for like years and years and years. So a lot of the times we're able to kind of provide that advocacy and provide responses to the court in those type of cases, which has been great.
Okay, great. All right, so any final questions from our social media platforms or anyone from our production team?
I have got nothing on my end on the YouTube nor the Zoom, but it is a very interesting and productive question. One of my favorite things with the NORML website, because I've been trying to plug that, has been that there is a tab available to go through legislation state by state.
Did you hear that, Abrahama?
I did get the end of it. She says legislation state by state.
Yeah, that's the last part I heard. There seemed to be an audio interference. It was I was hearing something else in the background.
Yeah, I've been having some issues with my audio connection today. How's this?
I literally logged in on my computer because Zoom from my phone, where I usually use it, has been horrible. And people were like, I can't hear you all day yesterday. So I was so happy today that it worked for me. I was like,
Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah, but
Good
what I
stuff.
was hearing, I don't think it was you, Nick. I was hearing Tandle's voice again. The question that Tandle asked was replaying as you were speaking.
That is weird. I've had now just like a jet go over my apartment. So that was
Okay. Okay, so you want to repeat your question right quick?
Of course. So less a question, more of an observation. I really enjoy looking at the NORML website, how they have a map by state law.
Mm.
I'm trying to plug that over on the YouTube because I think it's very useful, because since there is no consistent federal regulation as of yet, you got to familiarize yourself based on where you are, on
Yes.
what are going to be, on what process is going to look like. I know for me personally, I'm in Chicago, and so with Illinois, we've approved recreational adult use. So there is dispensaries all over the place at this point. There's even one very specific, a couple blocks like down from my apartment that I've passed by, Waken Bakery, that's very focused on like recreational use in the form of like edibles and drinks. But then there's other clinics in other sections of the city that are more focused on the actual plants. But that's not something that's shared in other states. So it's an incredibly important conversation, in part because it is so different based on where you are.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, even with that Illinois and Missouri border being so close. And then a lot of times dispensaries and businesses kind of market to the places that they're at. So, and it's so important. A part of the application process is that you have to have an laid out plan for how you intend on directly connecting with the community that you're in. So you have to be like, we're going to, if you're in an area with a lot of homelessness, we're going to have some type of outreach for the homeless. Or if you're in an area with a high crime, you're going to talk about how a lot of people talk about how they'll bring jobs to that area. So it is important to kind of look at the kind of your demographic and your surroundings. And a lot of dispensaries and brands are really kind of aware of that. They have a lot of awareness of that going in, just like with any other type of business. Like, you don't want to have a holistic grocery store that sells like nothing but vegan foods in an area where like steak shops are, what I mean, like the big thing. So it's definitely, they definitely do take into consideration a lot of that. And again, like I was saying, like places like Denver that I had been, one of the first places I went with big, recreational use, it is kind of about how the community is built. A lot of the dispensaries kind of match with where they're at. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that, Nick. Thanks for looking out on the state map legislation and posting. Okay. All right. So we are 2 minutes away from the end of the show, and I want to leave the closing remarks to you, Ms. Keys, because I want to make sure if there's anything that you didn't get a chance to mention, or something you want to leave as a talking point or a nugget, you have the opportunity to do so. You have the floor.
So I don't have much, just I really appreciate being a part of this conversation. I think that these conversations are so important just in reducing the stigma surrounding cannabis use in general. A lot of it is just that people aren't used to having these open conversations about it like they are about beer or wine or cookies or anything else in the world, or even medication. We have a lot of conversations right now about opioids and things like that.
Right.
But it's really big. Yeah, it's really big to make cannabis just as big of an important part of that conversation, and to continue answering questions and kind of dispelling some of the myths surrounding it, and really opening doors to the communities around the world, and especially here in Missouri as the program grows.
Okay, great. Well, look, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. As many of the members of the production team have said, this has been very, very rich and robust. I trust that our listening audience really got a lot of great takeaways and some clarity perhaps on what is and what isn't in terms of, usage and the opportunities that are available. And if you should have any need to come back and want to give us some updates on the legislation, and would be glad to have you to come back. We want to follow, and we often do follow-up sessions, segments and episodes, so that we can keep the listening public informed, especially our family member and friends who have someone that's incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, because this show is for them. And we will be doing we repurpose our live shows into audio blogs, 3 to 5 minute audio blog capturing salient points and highlights. We also repurpose it for content, what we call our Justice Beat blog posts, which Chandel writes. So we'll be able to put up in writing the context of this particular episode and post it, so people can always be able to put their hands on relevant resources. So you really provided us some rich information today.
And always feel free to reach out to Greater St. Louis NORML. We're on Facebook and Instagram. My organization, We Can, is on Facebook and Instagram as well. We provide a lot of information about events happening in different areas, as well as when stuff happens in the legislature. So
excellent. And we'll be sharing whatever we write up and stuff with you, so you can cross post and all of that. So, but again, thank you so much, Ms. Keys. I really, really appreciate you. I know you got a 12 o'clock event. And
it's funny because I'm literally, dispensaries are like lining up all around me as we speak.
Really? Wow. Okay. So yeah.
I just saw somebody, I'm like, I'm doing something, I can't talk to you, but yes, we're about to go down. So
give us at least 5 minutes of your time so we can do the behind the scenes photos.
Yeah, I have my other person is on it. So
okay, cool. All right. So that's been our episode on the legalization of marijuana. We thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We will be back in 2 weeks because we are taking a break for the Thanksgiving holiday. So there will not be another installment next Saturday, but we will be back on the 4th of December at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time via Facebook Live. Again, we want to thank our family and friends who join us on all of the social media platforms for being with us today. I want to thank my production team for stellar work once again in getting this show live and monitoring all of the social media platforms for Q&A. And that's it. God bless and have a wonderful Thanksgiving week.
Never the plan. attention.